This is StoryRobot. Welcome to r/Prorevenge. Our first story of today is, I did to my neighbor what they did to others. To start, I bought a house with the intention of doing a flip. When I moved in, the self-appointed block captain let me know who they were the first day. Sadly, they were my next-door neighbors. I tried to be friendly, but listening to them I realized how horrible they were and tried to keep still, be civil. My significant other kept saying, "Just wait for it to be our turn." They bragged about, though, their contacts with the city, forcing people to make improvements on their houses, getting undesirable renters out of the houses, and just harassing people in general. As I worked on flipping my house, the wife became a worse thorn in my side. To start, she demanded I put up a fence so people would quit cutting through my yard and scaring her. Then, her and the husband demanded I take care of the weeds in the yard or they will do it and bill me. After that, a tree scraped their shingles and they asked for $1,200 to replace them. The tree was there before I moved in, and by code they are responsible to cut back the branches to the property line. When I wouldn't pay, they had a relative jump my fence and cut the trees down. Needless to say, I began to ignore to them, so she became a constant gnat and moved on to another target. Then one day, as I was tearing down my deck for a patio, I realized she put a feral cat colony on a section of my property. I had wondered why all the stray cats were around, and I finally found out. I reached out to the city and demanded it be removed, but they said she followed the law on getting it in place. As I tried to get it shut down, she began unhinged behavior, from standing in her windows staring at me, yelling out the window at me, to hitting the fence with items to scare my dog. Here my revenge started. I started by filing a HRO, harassment restraining order, against the wife and had it granted ex parte with the evidence I provided, or course she contested, as it was defamatory to her character. Before the hearing, the husband tried to physically intimidate me, so I filed one against him and it was also granted ex parte. In the hearing, it came up that there was an HRO against the husband as well. They dogged being served until I had it published as a means of service. I started to make complaints about them in their house. Also, I made police calls when necessary. As I did this, the other neighbors began to realize they could do to them what they had done to them in others. For example, as I was having my front door replaced, needing a building work permit. I knew they were doing internal remodeling, so I called a city inspector and they were fined for not having permit. As she ranted at the inspector, he looked at my window and saw I had mine displayed. Their back porch became hoarded, so I made another call to a city inspector and they had to clear it out. Then they had a broken window on the porch door, so I called an inspector and they had to replace the door. Next, the paint on their house was peeling, so I called an inspector and they had to repaint. The inspector also found the wood underneath was rotted along with their front porch was sloping. So, they needed to fix the front porch, sections of wood, and repaint. Through all this, they had up cameras to prove they were not doing the things I said, meaning hitting the fence. They also pointed a camera at my backyard. As it was legal to point a camera into my yard and a part of my HRO was her intrusive watching behaviors, I gave the camera the middle finger on my way to and from my garage. When she complained, with the city tiring of her, their response was she was admitting to intrusively watching me. The fight over the cat colony came to an end when I realized one of the cats had a serious disease and I began to capture them and turn them into animal control. Don't worry, animal control was part of the feral cat program, so they would not be put down, but the neighbor would have to pay a fine to get each cat out or have the colony closed. Finally, I caught the sick one and it had rabies. Part of the program was for her to capture each new cat, have it vaccinated. Something she admitted to willing not doing on her GoFundMe for the colony. I soon had the GoFundMe shut down when I provided the evidence she was not using the funds as she stated they were going to be used. The city now had to act to close the colony. The person at animal control who wouldn't respond to my complaints was fired. The neighbors called in a city mediator who we met with, presented all the evidence and said we would not meet with them, and provided extremely racist tweets they made about neighbors. The city cut ties with them as community leaders. With their power to bully gone and having spent what I can only imagine in fines and repairs, like they did to numerous other neighbors. After 14 years they sold their house and moved out, way out to the suburbs where they only have one neighbor about 50 yards away. They knew I was wrapping up my flip and would be out in less than a year. Without being able to bully their neighbors, with people having their back, they seemed to have no further reason to stay. Needless to say, I did several more things to wear them down. Finally, when I listed my house, it was sold while theirs was still on the market. As a final beep you to them, I reported to the county they had both the new and old house listed as their homestead, meaning they were paying less in property taxes, so they got hit in with more fines on my way out. Our second story is, renege once the job's done. Prepare for your just desserts. A few years after I started my business, I was asked to clean up and optimize a number of PCs in multiple locations, as well as set up some forms and templates, for a new client who owned a local restaurant. The work, all labor apart from a little travel, was performed over the space of a month due to scheduling conflicts and school holidays, but, on completing the last of it, the client confirmed verbally that he was happy with all I'd done, and to go ahead and send an invoice. I duly emailed an invoice for a sum just in excess of £400. I waited for payment, never heard anything, sent reminder emails, called and left messages, but no response. Eventually a couple of busy months had passed and I met the client by chance in the local supermarket. On asking why he'd not paid or been in touch, he said that all the PCs were as bad as they had been before I'd started, and that he had tried to contact me with no success. As my landline and mobile phone had caller display as well as answering services, and there had been no emails, I knew the latter was BS, and as any PC user knows, a system can easily go back to pot if the user bad habits don't change. So I contacted a local debt collector, gave him the details, printouts of my call logs and post-invoicing emails, and he took them to the restaurateur. On his return his words were, "He's not disputing the invoice, he's saying that the work wasn't done right, so it's his word against yours." I queried if it was worth taking the guy to small claims, to which the debt collector said, "Even if you could prove he confirmed he was satisfied with the work, they might insist you get his computers back to their pre-invoice state again. Do you really want to spend more time doing that?" Of course the answer was no, so I stewed it over in my mind and came up with a plan. At this point it was late November, so, creating 2 throwaway email accounts in female names, I got in touch with the restaurant to book a large party for Valentine's night the following February. I put it down as, "My husband's surprise 40th birthday party," confirmed that my husband's sister, and CC'd her in the message with the other throwaway, couldn't make the journey north, but would happily pay the £10 per head deposit as her share towards the night. Of course, as time went on the ideas grew arms and legs. The numbers attending increased, until the owner suggested he'd reserve the whole restaurant for the evening, and they'd happily arrange the seating to suit us, but could I ensure the deposit was sorted ASAP please? Of course I confirmed that the sister was a scatterbrain and that I'd ensure the check was with him very soon. He emailed the sister using the CC address and she confirmed it had been posted. To keep him on side, I asked for a proposed menu in advance so that I could send it to all the attendees for pre-ordering. Naturally they were delighted that they'd know this as it makes their life much easier. Consequently the numbers for all 3 courses were emailed in, with a few fussy eater variables thrown in for good measure. Needless to say by the beginning of February he was getting quite antsy about there being no sign of the deposit, but I reassured him that the sister's check must have been lost in the post, so she'd send another by special delivery, if they could ensure someone was there to sign for it. I knew the owner lived about 25 miles away, and the restaurant didn't open until 5 p.m., so he'd have to come in very early and hang around waiting for it. A week before D-Day and he'd obviously had enough. He emailed in a spat saying they'd turned away numerous inquiries, had no deposit, and could no longer hold back on taking other bookings. This time I didn't bother replying. My part was done. My wife, at the time, and I were booked in at another restaurant close by for our own Valentine's meal, after which we took a walk past the restaurateur's business premises to see just 2 cars in their parking lot, one of which was his. I'm not sure how much he must have lost out on that night, but knowing his prices I'd bet it was significantly more than the £400 plus I'd invoiced him. Of course lessons were learned by me too, get written or emailed confirmation of job satisfaction for one, and not letting new clients go unbilled for too long was another. Naturally I had no hesitation letting all and sundry know how he'd behaved either, so he was blacklisted, or forced to pay up front for any work, by IT and other professionals I knew locally. Thank you for watching. Error. Problem detected. Not enough subscribers. Please subscribe, like and comment.